Imagine one day you wake up and you feel a sense of emptiness. No, it's not a lack of breakfast, though the butterscotch pie in the other room does smell delicious. It's a type of emptiness that is almost representative of something deeper, something familiar to you, but extremely foreign at the same time. Finally, you remember your promise. You can't say or even think about it for too long though, because the pain of the memories, it wells up inside of you, and you can't allow that to be what makes you whole. So instead, you choose to let the promise itself consume you. And when it does, you feel like you're driven by a motor, a spectator in your own body, allowing an external force to control your every action. Of course, I'm not just describing anyone's experience, but I'm talking about Kris dreemurr. And while this can be applicable to many people's mental states, it's also why I find Kris as a character really endearing and relatable. So let's talk about them. An individual with a complex past driven by external motivations, but has the potential to be one of the most interesting main protagonists in all of gaming. This is a dive into the character of Kris dreemurr. So, the supposed main character of Deltarune has a complex past, and they represent even more complex themes in the greater story of this game. So this begs the question, just who is Kris dreemurr? And why do we still not fully understand their role in the story of Deltarune? Well, some of the answers can be found in the narrative pillars that we find throughout the game, but to properly provide an in-depth analysis of Kris as a character, we also need to understand Kris's complex history so that we can understand their motivations as a character. And this will also hopefully tell us how they will potentially grow in later chapters. Forgive me if I miss some of the finer details, but as far as we know, Kris is the only human in town and populated entirely by monsters. And due to this, it was pretty safe to say that we can assume that Kris was adopted by the dreemurr family. This family includes Toriel, Asgore, Togor, and Asriel dreemurr. And we do learn a bit about Kris's history, that they had a relatively normal upbringing otherwise. That of course is until things took a turn. In Deltarune chapter 3, we learn that the dreemurr family had a close relationship with another family in town, the Holidays. Now, we aren't certain of the exact events that transpired, but at some point, one of the Holiday children, December, or Des as she is most commonly referred to as, went missing. This event drove a divide between the two families and amongst the families themselves, leading to Asgore and Toriel's divorce. And in this divorce, Toriel seemingly blaming Asgore for whatever events transpired with December, and also leading Asgore to want to prove himself that it wasn't his fault. But how does this all affect Kris? Well, first it fractured their relationship with Toriel and Asgore. Toriel being more of a worrywart now with Kris, while also at the same time being a little bit too lenient of a mother when Kris kind of probably needs them there the most. Secondly, it appears to have fractured Kris's relationship with another Holiday child, Noelle, who they used to have a really close relationship with before the disappearance of December, which led to the two drifting completely apart. And lastly, and probably most importantly, it changed their relationship with Asriel. We learn in chapter 4 that Des and Asriel had a very close relationship, and it could be easily assumed that Des's disappearance has led to their detachment from the family. Sure, it could be as simple as actually, they did go on to college and they're trying to get their education, but it could be a way for Asriel to be running away from their problems. And whether it was malicious or not, it left Kris behind without a support network. And despite Kris's early childhood ostracizations from the different people in the monster community, Kris probably really loved their life before the tragedy that befell December. And all that being said, this brings me to my first character trait that I feel represents Kris dreemurr, which is of course the loss of childhood. There's this really amazing comic series by Heartbreaker1 on Twitter I really recommend you go check out. And I know that these comics aren't canon, but a lot of the comics depict Asriel and Des and Noelle and Kris and the whole gang before the events that led to December's disappearance. They involve these beautifully drawn fights between Asriel and December, all of them being in the Dark World, and us seeing some characters from the Dark World that we all know and love. And again, I know it's not canon, but I would imagine it kind of hits pretty close to striking distance when it comes to personifying Kris's life before everything went down. I mean, if my childhood was as fraction of a cool as how this is depicted here in Juan's work, I too would also long for my childhood. I mean, I already do that already every time I replay Mario Party or Pajama Sam, so I would imagine if I was having literal live concert performances and playing Smash Bros with anime level fight details for funsies, I would just be distraught losing all of that. But in all seriousness, this is just another relatable aspect of Kris. While we may not be able to relate to the actual Dark Worlds and things they were doing within those Dark Worlds, but we can relate to the actual loss of childhood and having to grow up and deal with some of the things that we have to do going into adulthood, you know? And unfortunately, that grief and emotion is what Kris kind of personifies in Deltarune. Like, we even see this loss when Noelle describes how Kris used to be a funny prankster, used to be really good buddies with her, but that energy and personality appears to have just been lost over time. And it's incredible how Deltarune is able to just communicate all these complex emotions all through the subtext and context clues that just paint such a brilliant picture of Kris's past. It what makes up a core pillar of their identity as a character. So now that we understand Kris's past of their lost childhood, it's this lost childhood I feel that really fuels the other two narrative pillars that make up their character. One pillar being the loss of belonging, and the other one being the loss of self and autonomy. But let's start with the first one, the loss of belonging. There are details suggesting Toriel having to make an extra effort to raise Kris due to the books that she checked out in the library about raising a human child. We also know that Kris from the get-go felt ostracized, being the only human amongst all the monsters. Not necessarily malicious, but just because of the nature of this situation. Of course, Kris used to wear those horns like all the time. We even saw them in the flashback in Chapter 3. All of this is to say that even despite their relatively normal, loving home and supportive friends and family that was close to them, Kris never really felt 100% like they belong. I mean, I'm sure this is a sentiment that many people in the real world can relate to, especially those who maybe change schools frequently growing up, or even somebody who's from an immigrant community where you and your core family are a very tight-knit unit, but sometimes you struggle to find the found family amongst your peers. I mean, it's just another incredibly powerful and relatable message that Kris represents that I just love the writing of this character and how Toby Fox portrays them. But back to the point of belonging and how it relates to the game, I mean, one of the first scenes in this game is Kris having little to no friends in class. Not one person in this classroom wants to be their partner for the school project. And even when one person tries to make the exception, another character doesn't just say they don't want it to happen, but outright actively protest them being on their project team. I mean, where does this Mordecai-looking motherfucker think they have the audacity to gatekeep anything, you know? Anyways, thank God Barney came in to solve the they-them loneliness epidemic in this town. But jokes aside, it's actually this relationship with Susie that is going to lead to Kris's growth as a character and finding belonging amongst their peers. One of the clearest signs of this growth in their relationship is this scene from the diner. It really just exemplifies the growth in their relationship and how it may unfortunately become a sticking point at some point in the near future, where the two of them are going to consider each other very close and have to make a really important decision regarding their relationship to avoid harm's way. I can just imagine something along the lines of Kris having to make a hard choice between whoever they're working with and the Soul and Susie, and the two having some sort of falling out based on the Soul and Susie questioning who even Kris really is. Which actually leads me into my final point. So finally, we have come to the most detailed and complex narrative pillar that Kris represents, and that is of course the loss of autonomy and their true self. One key but sinister detail I have mentioned about Kris's past is it's implied they're responsible in some capacity for December's disappearance. Whether directly or indirectly, we don't exactly know, but we know that they are feeling some sort of guilt for the events of December's disappearance. Like, I mean, the egg room in Chapter 4 literally says something about how this is the room where we paint pictures and don't kill people. Like, I don't know how much more on the nose you can get. And not only that, there's also the way that they appear to be colluding with the Roaring Knight and Carol in some capacity due to whatever appears to be a promise made through some sort of guilt. We don't have the clear-cut answer to all of this, but it's clear that an external force is what's driving Kris forward in the narrative, and what is allowing us, the player, to take control of Kris's autonomy and take it away from them. But we also know that they do not enjoy giving themselves up like this. There are multiple times throughout the story where Kris seems shaken up, especially after the dialogue with Spamton, comparing Kris to themselves as a puppet, or how they're trying to prevent you from seeing anything that they perceive as helpful or against their goal of saving Undying or stopping anything that the Roaring Knight does. The ultimate point being, the Soul and essentially us, the player, are at odds with Kris. This is the ultimate form of losing oneself. You, the player, are forcing Kris to perform actions in a ways that they normally would never act, or sometimes in extreme and weird circumstances, to commit unspeakable acts they would even think about. Like I said before, talking about Kris's childhood, we have a pretty good picture of who Kris is and what they do and what's going on with their personal mental. But being controlled by this ungodly entity is enough to make any person's mental spiral. But what exactly happened all those years ago with December that warranted such an extreme response from Kris that they would have to forego not only the loss of childhood, the loss of self, and the loss of the belonging into their community? It's just all of these things that Kris sacrifices that really just takes it home the point that they probably have this extreme guilt for whatever they did, and they probably really are responsible for December's disappearance. And I just find that incredibly disheartening. There is hope, however, because much like real life, found family can be just as, if not more important to you in shaping your personality and outlook on life. Susie and Rossi are probably the key to helping Kris find their true self once more, helping them build their connections within their new friends, but most importantly, relying on them when the moment of truth really comes. This whole narrative and commentary is exactly why I think it is shaping up to be one of the most complex and compelling characters in any story in gaming. The lore that has shaped Kris into the current character that they are, the way that you learn it through different context clues and the different history and different characters, all of this building to a final climactic act that helps Kris's core character pillars and tragic past evolve into something greater. And more importantly, evolve into something wonderful and into a self-loving individual. And as always, thank you so much for watching.